they will be the first. Yes, a kind of this panel is a kind of dedicated to the issues that are relevant to the problem of the COVID-19 pandemics. And yes, the first one, for that reason, the first presentation will be made by Claudius Clüver from Claudius Clüver, Max Kanderska, and Finja Walsdorf from University of Siegen. And their topic is digital Biedermeier self-care in Animal Crossing New Horizons. Yeah, please, I start.
Can you see the presentation?
Yes, right.
Okay, nice. Well, thank you for having us today. I'm Finja Walsdorf, and with me are Claudius Clüver and Max Kanderska. We are all PhD candidates at the University of Siegen in Germany and part of a research group that is called Games Co-op, where we focus on researching games together. And today we are going to talk about the topic of digital Biedermeier and self-care and care in the game Animal Crossing New Horizons. Okay, so why did we decide to cover this topic? During the COVID-19 related lockdowns in 2020, gaming became one of the most popular crisis hobbies, and suddenly everyone was playing. Even like the Switch console was sold out, at least in Germany, the games were sold out, and even people who have never played before suddenly were playing games. I'm thinking of my mother, who really never touched a console before, and suddenly she was a gamer herself. And when I was calling her or visiting her, she would say, Finja, give me 5 more minutes. I have to finish this level, then I'm going to be there for you. So that was definitely new and very interesting to me. And yeah, people increasingly started playing games during the lockdown and used them to interact with others, despite the social distancing rules. And games helped many people to deal with feelings of anxiety, loneliness, and boredom during this time. As you can see on this slide, this is from the German Association of the German Games Industry, and they did a survey where they found out that games have provided a major source of support for millions of people during the COVID-19 pandemic. And according to them, almost a third of the participating players stated that games helped them to cope with the pandemic situation. And even the World Health Organization, that has been rather critical of games before and was discussing them in regards of topics like addiction, suddenly was almost promoting games and said that we should play them together under the hashtag #PlayApartTogether and advised playing them for social connection with others. So to us, this shift of perception in games is very exciting. We have talked about this earlier today when you asked me what the discourses around games in Germany are. And one of them, and also in other countries, definitely is that the view of games often is very deficit focused. And things like their suspected potential for violence, for antisocial behavior, and for addiction are highlighted. And however, in public discourse and also in literature, there have been recently more and more attempts to kind of change this view and to position games as tools for self-improvement and self-care. And here, researchers don't just focus on the well-known things like escapism and distraction that can help you with your personal psychological well-being, but they are increasingly asking how and why exactly games can support psychological growth and self-care, and even help dealing with mental health issues. And on this slide, you see a great example. This is an anthology that was edited by Rachel Covert in 2020. It's called Video Games and Wellbeing, and it's trying to present how gaming can be a pro-social and mentally healthy activity, actually, something we have also spoken as a part of this conference a lot already. So we think it's great that this shift of perception is happening. And games are increasingly seen as kind of self-help programs that can connect, distract, and comfort people. And we often see players discussing that as well. So when researching for this presentation, we went to Twitter, and as you can see on this slide, people are talking about the game Animal Crossing as a means of self-care, which was very interesting to us. So for today's presentation, We have studied the existing literature on games and mental well-being. We have also observed online player communities of the Animal Crossing game in particular, and we have played and studied Animal Crossing New Horizons. And the choice for the game Animal Crossing New Horizons was kind of natural in this context because it was like the game to play during lockdown. It was a huge success when it came out in 2020. And even people who haven't played games before suddenly became Animal Crossing players, like my mother, who I just mentioned, suddenly had her own island in Animal Crossing, which was super fascinating to me. And many players were highlighting the positive, wholesome content of the game and celebrated that. Animal Crossing was often praised as a self-care tool in the last year and a way to increase the psychological well-being during lockdown. And it helped many players to escape from the anxiety they felt in this uncertain Corona times because they were able to immerse themselves into a kind of ideal world. Animal Crossing can be categorized as a tend and befriend game, as opposite to fight or flight titles. The latter are focusing on adrenaline and danger, and of course the fun and excitement around that, whereas tend and befriend games used to be a lot calmer. They revolve around caring and tending to a virtual environment and its inhabitants. And other focuses are well-being, community, comforting messages, and the general low-stress gameplay. However, the tend and befriend genre has a long history, and Animal Crossing the first Animal Crossing game was already released in 2001, so a long time ago. And there are even earlier tend and befriend games, like you can see here, Harvest Moon, Back to Nature from 1996. And I think this one is a great example to kind of specify the genre tend and befriend, because I already told you that you tend to the virtual environment, but befriending the characters in the game is also a big deal in those tend and befriend games. Because one of the possible outcomes in Harvest Moon is marriage. And if players want to marry one of the available candidates, then they have to befriend them first by talking to them and giving them gifts. And if they are successful and put enough effort into this, then they will reach friendship points, and eventually they will be able to unlock romance, then marriage, and then even childbirth. And in 2016, as you can see, and I guess everyone here knows it, another popular farming game called Stardew Valley came out. And ever since then, there has been kind of a huge boom around the farming simulator genre. And we see more and more games and tend and befriend games actually in that style. And like I said before, the games we are looking at here, they are usually helping us to immerse into an ideal world where there's no danger, no disasters, and no violence. Instead, they encourage caring and increase the well-being through kind of meditative gameplay and a generally positive attitude. And some of the values that are highlighted in those tend and befriend games are gratitude, patience, diligence, care, and solidarity. On to Animal Crossing New Horizons. This game sends players to a lonely, idyllic island that they are supposed to cultivate, to manage, and to decorate. And this island is not only populated by the players themselves, but also by animals, anthropomorphic animals that can interact with them and talk to them, as you can see on this image. It's a real-time social simulation game. So if someone decides to play the game at 8 a.m. in the morning, it will also be 8 a.m. in the game. So the game has its own day and night circle, and also different seasons each year. Some of the daily activities in the game are fishing, gardening, woodworking, crafting, and decorating. And players can earn in-game money and materials by doing those tasks, and then use the in-game money they have earned and the materials to, for example, build their house or design the island and craft items. And another important activity, I've told you before, the tend and befriend game, is of course befriending the villagers in Animal Crossing. And here you can see me with my favorite villager in my game in Germany. She's called Edith the sheep. She's my best friend in Animal Crossing. And to achieve that, I of course had to give her lots of gifts and lots of affection for us to become best friends.
I think you're not on that slide. I still see Harvest Moon and Stardew Valley.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Did it work now?
No.
I can maybe try it again. Do you see something now?
No, only black screen.
I'm sorry.
Should one of us try?
Yeah, maybe you can try it from.
Okay, I'll do it.
It's slide number 7 now.
Yeah, 1 sec. I have to get my.
Yeah, but Finja,
You're still.
Yeah,
you're
sorry.
still, yeah, okay.
Okay, where was I? So like I said,
No,
Animal
you're still
Crossing.
sharing. I'm sorry.
Oh.
You have to stop it. Just it's not working.
Okay. Okay. And then one
Is
more.
visible?
Next. Yeah, it's visible for me.
And it's your sheep. Yeah.
And then one more. Like next slide, please.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Animal Crossing can feel like a lot of work because I have told you all the activities you can do and all the effort you can put into, for example, your relationships. And if you do all those tasks, you can generally progress in game, of course, and you can unlock new content. And a great example for this is the weed that you can pull out in the game. So to clean your island, you will have to pull out weed off the ground. But once you're done and your island is clean, the next day the weed will regrow. So you will have to do it again and again every day. The cycle continues. And of course, also the relationship care to the NPC characters is actually a lot of work and asks you to do a lot of effort. If you're nice to them and give them gifts, this will be rewarded. But if you ignore them or even mistreat them, they will complain and perhaps even move away from your island. So you have to generally be hardworking to be successful in Animal Crossing. But it's important to note that the work you do is always manageable, and there are no serious obstacles or any pressure in the game. There's actually no game over in the game, and there will always be a second chance. So players can do everything at their own pace. And because of that, players often describe that they feel sort of control over the virtual world, which makes the gaming experience pleasant and relaxing. And that's very important, especially during COVID-19 times, because we don't feel in control of the world we live in right now often. So escaping to the virtual island can be a very positive moment for us. Now I've told you a lot about the care of the game world and its inhabitants, but actually Animal Crossing also encourages us to care for each other and to do mutual care through the multiplayer that it has. And this is one example, a birthday party me and my friends did in Animal Crossing for one of our friends. And yeah, okay, next slide. Just quickly going over this is another example because the birthday party was like a very positive thing that happened. But yeah, there are also people using Animal Crossing and its multiplayer to explore more serious topics like mental health issues or, for example, grief. This is one example of a user whose grandma passed away, and she built a graveyard in Animal Crossing to think of the deceased grandma. Okay, next slide. Thank you very much. That was it from me. I hope I brought across the point that Animal Crossing is a very wholesome game for many of us, a very positive game, a tent and befriend game. But as you can see here, when I was going through my shots and videos yesterday, even in the most peaceful tent and befriend game, people will always find a way to include some fight or flight content because for some reason my friends and me decided to hit this poor bunny. Okay, on to Claudius.
Yeah, thanks. My approach to the topic at hand was to look for a conceptual framework that could help in finding approaches to analyze the phenomena just outlined by Finja and to help to talk about them. I took my departure in building a bridge between care and Animal Crossing with ideas of Sebastian Möhring, who spoke yesterday as the keynote. And Sebastian used Martin Heidegger's notion of care to talk about existential aspects of video games. As Sebastian mentioned yesterday, in Heidegger's conception of care, the phenomena of fear and anxiety are central. Heidegger even develops his concept of care out of existential anxiety, and this anxiety out of fear, which he posits as the feeling of being directly, imminently threatened by harm, as we maybe can see in this image here, where the player is imminently threatened by monsters in Doom. Now, this applied to video games gives us a lens to understand a great many games and to analyze fear structures in them. Sebastian has done this for Doom and Tetris, among others, arguing that Doom and Tetris have a similar fear structure, which may be a little bit surprising. Yesterday, he used the terms to talk about Super Mario Brothers. The central point of anxiety in these games is, following Sebastian, is that if I fail, the game ends and I have to start over. This, however, is not true in the games that we are interested in today. In Animal Crossing, like Finja outlined, there isn't even a real way to fail. I only can do better or worse in a couple of ways. We now have care totally devoid of any anxiety or even fear. Maybe I get bit by a tarantula or stung by a scorpion, but that's basically it in the game. Also, I would argue from my own experience that the existential dimension, the anxious fight in games like Doom depends on care and not the other way around. For me to be anxious about Mario falling into a pit, I first have to care about the fortune of Mario in the game, or about a high score or something in the game. Sebastian even has written about his challenges getting over an initial repulsion from the more challenging aspects of Doom 2016, the fear that the gameplay evoked in him. So the anxiety basically kept him from the game. This means maybe, at least in some cases, care is first and fear second. If I don't care, why should I be anxious? For me, this meant I was looking for something to update the use of Heidegger in game studies. More specifically, I wanted someone to turn Heidegger on his head, if you will. I found this turn with Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition. In this work, Arendt puts Martin Heidegger's horse back before the cart, if I may say so, making the central point of her conception of the human condition birth instead of death. Heidegger's being there as being towards death, famous terms of his, as the condition that informs his attitudes toward care, anxiety, and fear, is replaced by natality. This concept of natality is the fact that first, we are all born as newcomers in this world, and B, that we as a species have to deal with the constant influx of those newcomers. Care is a necessity, since not only these newcomers, but a lot of other people, like old people or sick people, need active care, regardless of attitude or anxieties. Care as a term interestingly features relatively little in The Human Condition. The title of the German edition of the book is Vita Activa, The Active Life. Arendt talks at length about the actions humans partake in that are necessitated primarily by natality. She orders human activity in three categories: work, labor, and action. Labor is what we maybe would describe as reproductive work, anything that is necessary to ensure our direct survival as a group. Work is productive work, anything that produces things that stand the test of time, which may give us greater security in our survival and more convenience. Very central aspects in Animal Crossing. The last category of activity describes the public sphere, where groups of people come together and are forced to make decisions about the way they live together. They are forced to do this, among other things, to deal with natality, to deal with the influx of newborns. Natality factors in here in the other way as well. Every human is born as a newcomer. Every one of us is able to make a new beginning in the sphere of action and to change the world in concert with others. The sphere of action is the sphere of the political. The structure of the three activities of labor, work, and action gives us an analytical tool set to look at Animal Crossing. Labor and work, you have also already seen in Finja's part, the coming together, also in the birthday parties and the funerals. And for me, I just want to say now, the shift from care to the active life, we move away from care as an attitude to care as practice. Maybe it is to be problematized that with the term care, we take away the focus from reproductive work or labor to a concept that stronger emphasizes an ethical attitude and less the material conditions of keeping us alive as individuals and as a species.
Thank you very much, Vinja and Claudius. So, to understand why we chose the concept of digital Biedermeier to theorize the practices of care present in Tend and Befriend games, we first have to take a look at the historical Biedermeier period. The Biedermeier refers to a time of relative political stability in Central Europe that lasted from the Congress of Vienna at the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 up to the political upheaval of the German revolutions of 1848. It derives its name from Gottlieb Biedermeier, which you can see a painting here, a fictional character invented as a means to satirize and lampoon the apolitical stance and moral uprightness, the German Biederkeit, of a new middle class that the 19th century's rapid urbanization and industrialization had given rise to. This apolitical stance was fueled by the Karlsbad Decrees of 1819, a body of legislation aimed at restricting the written freedom of expression, installing censorship of the press, and dissolving political groups like fraternities. Intimidated by these laws, artists looked to benefit from the well-funded clientele of the new urban bourgeoisie, who began embellishing their domestic spaces as a means of escape from the bustle of the industrialized world and the increasingly regulated sphere of political and public commitment. Thus, the studies and parlors of the time became home to ornate carpets, drapery, and of course, the eponymous Biedermeier furniture. Typical of the style are clear lines, simplicity, and a restrained classicistic elegance with a focus on material and texture, features that went on to influence the stylistic developments of the 20th century at large. The miniature worlds cultivated in titles such as Harvest Moon or Animal Crossing seem to revive the ideals attributed to the historic period of the Biedermeier. An inward focus on the familiar and the tried and tested, the desire to furnish and design that is indispensable for creating a domestic refuge, and last but not least, the protection from the outside world guaranteed by the privacy of one's home. The isolation and narrow spatial boundaries of the digital interiors come with the advantage that it takes almost no time for a feeling of familiarity with the environment to set in. By virtue of this quality, they offer a welcome counterpoint to the spatial and medial dissolutions of boundaries that characterize the current health crisis. It is precisely these dissolutions which distinguish the corona pandemic from the financial and climate crisis that preceded and accompanied it, and which can also provide an explanation for the popularity of domestic scenarios in the games we studied. This becomes obvious when we turn to Walter Benjamin's description of the emergence of the bourgeois interior during the 19th century. So,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say that you have run out of time, but please, if you want to have time for the Q&A section, please come to the close of the presentation. So.
Okay, so the opposition Benjamin describes here between living space and workplace, of course, has long been eroded due to the state of perpetual potential availability generated by digital media, and it has been further dissolved in the wake of the current health crisis, as we ourselves are currently experiencing by participating in a conference from our private spaces. So in the form of quarantines, home office and homeschooling, the pandemic takes place firstly and foremost within one's own four walls. So now the private individual has to deal with reality, as Benjamin said, by carrying out both reproductive labor and wage labor in the confines of one's home. So at the same time, the compensatory practices of taking control, that is of arranging one's home, moves to the digital, to a place of retreat of the second order, so to speak. So the increasing popularity of digital havens like Animal Crossing can be explained by the colonization and reshaping of previous spaces of escape brought about by the recent crisis of the capitalist mode of production. And this is not a solipsist, a move into solipsism. That is not only a regress into the domestic space, but this also enables political activism and communal practices, as Finja also outlined. And I'll just skip over these examples now because we ran out of time. So of course we have the Black Lives Matter movement. Then we have activism by the players that influences the developers of games to change things in their games. For example, the big skin tone update in The Sims, which added over 100 different shades of skin tones. Also stuff like same-sex marriage in Story of Seasons, which is a part of the Harvest Moon series that Finja mentioned earlier. And this is especially interesting because it also calls into question the capitalist logic behind Harvest Moon. You have to take out a credit in order to buy the stuff for your house, to decorate your house, while at the same time, yeah, I mean, the activists criticize the capitalist logic behind the game, while also making, while players at the same time make use of sites like Nukazon to trade items, so to engage in capitalist modes of interaction and trade. Okay, and I'll just end it here, I think, and say, while the Biedermeier interior was originally associated with reactionist ideas and the petty bourgeois retreat into the private sphere, its digital counterpart employs a similar inward movement to ultimately create wider networks of sociality and care. As the games we have discussed in this paper put an emphasis on bourgeois practices like budgeting, furnishing, and interior decoration, they could be understood as making a return to the values of the Biedermeier period. But the forms of mutual care we have identified are not regressive or reactionary at all. While players find comfort in the game's wholesome setting and enjoy engaging in tasks that allow them to take a break from the perpetual crisis of the real world, they are certainly not longing for a better yesterday, but for a beneficial and considerate way to deal with uncertain present times. The retreat to an interior space, which acts as a location and catalyst for communication, critique, and political exchange, can be described with another term dating back to the 17th and 18th century. The salon, made famous by the gatherings of French literates under the auspices of a well-respected hostess, denotes both a certain spatial configuration as well as a social practice connected to it. Framing the social activities described in this text in such a fashion, the digital Biedermeier interior emerges as both a refuge and a place of exchange, political engagement, and collective knowledge transfer, wherein the participants care about and for their fellow players, as well as for the digital and physical surroundings. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank all of you, of course, and that was a great presentation. Does anybody have questions? Well, no, yeah, if not, then I will ask. So thank you again for the great presentation. And so the first one that I had, don't you think that yes, using this game and other games as well that Finja meant in the beginning of the presentation may be very useful in the time of pandemics, because you have a lot of troubles in the world that you cannot change, and then you're using, so to say, this escapism, yeah, in escapistic way, you are hiding yourself like a Biedermeier there. And so the first question that emerged in my mind already then was, don't you think that maybe it's actually producing even more problems? Because when you are coming back, you see that nothing actually changed, yeah, and that all was only just in the game, and so in the fiction world, and then you see that everything is the same, and so it may be even more disappointing in a long-term period. Don't you think so? Yes, and it's actually maybe others could also think about it and add some other questions, because we were talking about those things a lot before. Yeah.
I know where you're coming from. I laugh about this, but I actually think this differentiating between the real world and the fictional world, for many players of Animal Crossing, that's not a fact, because what they experience in the game is their real world. And especially during the lockdown, where many of us, me included, played way more than usual, this became kind of my real world, even though I knew, okay, this is a game, but this felt very real to me, especially what I did with my friends and the mutual care I told you about. Of course, this was not a real birthday party, but it just felt like a very special mutual moment of care. And I personally never had the feeling when I stopped playing my game, like, oh no, now I'm back in the horrible real world. But I was happy that I had kind of a coping strategy by playing Animal Crossing and other Tend and Befriend games to deal with the problems, because whenever I stopped my gaming session, I just felt better about myself and my life, and I felt motivated and just mentally better in general. So for me, and I think for many other people I know and I have talked to, this was kind of the same.
Okay, so it is more about not escaping from this world to another, but rather about both entangling them both together. Yeah, yes, true. And yeah, then another question was about Arendt and using her phenomenological ideas. Do I understand correctly your idea that we rather could and should use Arendt's ideas more than Heidegger's when we're analyzing games? Because in games because in Arendt's theory, we have more activities, we have more, not activities, but rather that the other has a greater role for me, and I'm rather caring for others and for the political activities and so on. Yeah, whereas in the Heidegger's case, it is all about selfishness and so on.
That's my reading. That's my reading in any case. And first, I wanted to get away from Heidegger, and to me, a small but significant next step was Arendt. I don't know if I want to stay with Arendt, but yes, that's basically the move I wanted to make. Yeah. Yeah, Heidegger to me reads like in the end you turn out with some solipsism, some neoliberalism, or worse. Yeah.
Yeah, yes, very interesting. And in the end, you were also touching this topic of Salon and of this political movement, so to say. And by the way, why exactly Salon? Because I remember that Arendt, and maybe in that case the presentation would be even more coherent inside of it, because I remember that Arendt was also writing something about Soviets, not in the way how it was elaborated afterwards in the Soviet Russia, of course, but the initial idea of Soviets as a small groups of people who are solving their problems together in a deliberational movements. Yeah, so maybe. Yeah, I understand why you chose to talk about salons as well, but maybe Soviets could be also a nice concept to think about. Yeah.
That's a very interesting suggestion, actually. I mean, especially with this whole sub theme of criticizing the capitalist mode of production and stuff like that. So this would be another entendre we could add to that. Yeah, that's great. I mean, I chose the salon mainly because it's another domestic space, right? And that's a domestic space that, of course, creates a public in the end. What is being discussed in the salon and the opinions formed on literature, on politics, then get out into the public. So we wanted to have like this first, there's this inward movement. We go into the domestic spaces of Animal Crossing, but then this domestic space becomes politicized, and then the message spreads out outwards. It creates a public. So it's only a retreat at first glance, but in the end, it's communication to a wider network of people.
Yeah, and if I may say just very shortly, Arendt has a couple of images in her mind there. She's also talking about the Greek polis, and she's a great proponent of the American Republic. Some of those things are maybe problematic looking at it today, but I really like that reference also. I have to look for that more.
Yeah, and Andrei Shevlyakov is mentioning in the chat room that, yeah, in English it should be called consuls. Yeah, I think, yes, Andrei, that's the reason why you, yeah, Thank you. Yeah, maybe it's a better translation to English, so I'm not so, because I was not so sure about.
Oh
So
yeah,
so,
Räte in German.
yeah, okay. So thank you again. I'm sorry for stopping this discussion, because for me personally it was, at least, was very interesting.